Yeah, I mean, even in Hawaii, indigeneity is contested by indigenous Hawaiians. So what am I? I would describe myself as Kanaka Maoli, which in Hawaiian language or level of Hawaii is like Kanaka person or people. Maoli can mean real, it can mean Aboriginal, native, indigenous. So you put that together, Kanaka Maoli is a native person. But you could also describe it as Kanaka Hawaii, person from Hawaii, Hawaiian person. But we have other phrases and idioms like kanaka oiwi. Oiwi is a word that can mean like of the bone. So it's a reference to our iwi kupuna that are buried in the land of Hawaii that then commingle with that land, which is cultivated to produce more life. So people of the bone is also a reference more poetically to Aboriginal Hawaiian people or indigenous Hawaiian people. So those are more appropriate ways I would describe myself. And then those get kind of captured by the international globalized definition and principles of what indigenous is, which is a modern category. And so in Hawaii, to consider oneself as Kanaka Maoli is a status of who we are and how we know ourselves, but it isn't always understood in the terms of indigeneity. And here's a clear example. There are some Kanaka Maoli that identify as native people of Hawaii, but are Hawaiian nationals. So what's a Hawaiian national? It's a person that claims their national citizenship to the Hawaiian kingdom, the Hawaiian nation state. So Hawaiian nationals, some of which who are Kanaka Maoli, some of which who are not, might claim and do some that to not be indigenous on two registers, which are really interesting. And it's about the kind of economy of racialization globally. It's about U.S. politics in particular, I would say, and U.S. sort of settler colonial politics even more particularly. But some would suggest that indigenous peoples are those that do not have a nation state to claim, right? So like American Indians. And so this is a really big issue for us in our community because of the way that it stalls the relationship building, like you were just describing about indigeneity, which is so important, a kind of collective global relationality built around similar struggles and experiences with territorial dispossession and also forms of counter dispossession. And the other part of that is some claim who are Kanaka Maoli or not Kanaka Maoli that are Hawaiian national citizens to also not recognize indigeneity on an international level because of the differences between UN UNDRIP regulations of whom is considered an indigenous person, what kinds of legal assertions they can make for self-determination in colonial situations. So the Hawaiian exceptionalism really comes out in those expressions of what it means to be a person in Hawaii, depending on how you position yourself. And so it kind of just goes like in this logic, right? The Hawaiian Kingdom was internationally recognized in the middle of the 19th century in 1843 by Britain and France. We signed a treaty. That treaty was binding in all sorts of international principles, and it's never been extinguished. There's never been a treaty that the Hawaiian Kingdom has entered into with the United States to cede the territory to the United States, and so Hawaii is under an illegal military occupation as a result in international law. And so the state continues to exist, yet under military occupation, which is illegal.
It's militarily occupied by the U.S.
So we should follow
So crazy.
we should follow protocols for deoccupation, not decolonization. And so then we run into this really interesting politics about decolonization versus deoccupation, indigenous politics versus international law. And in Hawaii, like in the kind of intelligentsia of like organizers and thinkers, this is a really big issue because then it really obfuscates how we engage development projects, but also each other when we organize against development projects or the military even. And so this is a space, this Indigenous Politics Collaboratory, which I think is positioned in an interdisciplinary way to really grapple with those kinds of issues that are complex in Hawaii, for instance, but elsewhere too.